Western countries are increasingly realizing that it will not be possible to defeat or isolate Russia's economy, and no one predicted such a scenario. And what to do now, no one knows. It turns out that there is no plan B for the countries of the collective West, because no Western expert, not even a Nobel Prize winner in economics, would even allow for the hypothetical possibility of sustainability of the economy, the military-industrial complex and, most importantly, popular support for Vladimir Putin. Russia was supposed to lose, to retreat, to eventually become frightened in the face of total sanctions by the entire Western community. Russia's economy should become isolated and poverty should prevail in the country. As Western politicians and economists stated back in early 2023 at the World Economic Forum in Davos. But Russia's isolated economy continues to host delegations from 68 countries around the world. However, it was clear even then that Russia did not simply withstand Western sanctions and did not suffer critical losses. Even more so, the economy started to recover. However, Western politicians preferred not to notice it, convincing themselves and the whole world that Russia's economy was ruined with all the consequences. But not even a year later, the American edition of the Wall Street Journal dared to write the truth, namely, that the entire Western world was under magical illusions of the imminent end of Russia, which has absolutely nothing to do with reality. The jigs, it's time to end the magical thinking about Russia's defeat. Putin has withstood all Western efforts to reverse it. The power is solid. The US and its allies need a new strategy, deterrence. According to the publication, all this time, Europe's politicians have been wishful thinking, ignoring all contradictory data. According to the authors of the publication, the United States and its allies need to clearly understand the long-term nature of this venture and start working on a contingency plan to contain Russia. Of course, even before the Western media's frank admission of their illusions about Russia, it was obvious to the whole world that the West's bet had not played out. It was obvious to Westerners as well, who in various blogs and podcasts began asking uncomfortable questions. Therefore, the Western top brass tried their best to convince them of their rightness or to explain the reasons for this state of affairs. For example, the same Wall Street Journal has previously published articles whose authors were convinced that Russia is resisting only because its entire economy is supposedly militarized. And it's as if every Russian today is either at the front or working, producing for the front. And it is only because of this that Russia is recovering its dwindling strength faster than many could have imagined. Obviously, the Western press needed to somehow find a justification for the events taking place, especially after the February words of acting U.S. Army General Mark Milley, who unequivocally stated, "Russia lost, not lost strategically, operationally, and tactically." True, he resigned triumphantly afterward. Russia, in the opinion of the U.S. Army General in office at the time, had lost on all fronts. February 2023 article. The general's words were conveniently reinforced by a study released in February by the Key Institute for the World Economy, which summarized the results of aid to the West. To you know who. The 75-page countdown summarized all available information on support measures for the Western community for the year 2022. The results of the support impressed many experts. For example, the United States alone provided significantly more support than Lend-Lease aid to the Soviet Union. Here are the U.S. costs in comparison. The researchers even compared the costs of direct U.S. involvement in various conflicts and current support for a single country. And this aid is not economic or for teacher salaries or pension payments. You know exactly what kind of support that was. It is important to emphasize that the calculation was made in equivalent terms, with all sorts of adjustments for inflation and other factors. The U.S. is not the only representative of the Western world providing aid to an all-too-familiar country. There are still countries in Europe whose combined share is comparable to the U.S. Thus, sub-aid from Western countries amounted to $240 billion in a year and a half. Here are the total support costs. What would you compare it to? For example, with the same Lend-Lease of the Soviet Union from 1941 to 1945, where the US and allies sent not only military aid, but also vehicles, industrial products, various directions, food, medicines and raw materials to the amount of more than $10 billion in 1940 prices. It is noteworthy that some Western historians seriously speculate that without Lend-Lease the alleged Soviet Union would surely have lost. Actually, 10+ billion in 1940 is $237 billion in 2023. And this is only the amount of proven Western aid, and all sorts of donations are left out of the brackets. We can only guess how much is in there. And all this against the backdrop of 18,000 sanctions against Russia. So many sanctions have never been imposed in the history of the world. Russia is subject to almost 1.5 times more sanctions than all other sanctioned countries combined. That's why Western politicians thought all along that Russia's fall was a matter of time. And often prescribed us losing as early 2023. However, time was running out. Western media began to realize an objective reality that they had previously refused to acknowledge. Thus, the Washington Post, one of the most popular U.S. media outlets, began publishing articles, the general sense of which described the fatigue of Western countries in confronting Russia. For example, in an article about October 24, 2023, the author writes that the countries of the collective West have begun to allocate money for nothing, while Russia shows no signs of being a loser. The likelihood that Western countries will be able to allocate as much money as before is zero, it writes there. And then some American magazine U.S. News and World Report awarded the Russian armed forces the leading status in the world, thereby pushing the U.S. into second place for the first time in history. On November 4, NBC published a piece whose authors, citing their sources in the government, claim that the Western world, led by the United States, is preparing a negotiating position in which Russia's interests will have to be taken into account. Apparently, it's time to somehow clarify a previously unbelievable fact to the public. Why will the Western countries, which earlier declared to the whole world that Russia is doomed, now be forced to make concessions to Russia and take into account its interests? The warming up of the public is clearly completed by the article in the Wall Street Journal of November 16, 2003, mentioned at the very beginning, the headline of which says that the Western world was under magical illusions about Russia. That's a twist.